Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined Monday night at halftime live by you for the Week 9 waiver wire column. Always live for you on Monday afternoon at 4for4.com, where we have the drop list to start, not to mention our top 10 overall rankings for every single position, and then, of course, every single position prioritized. Before we begin, reminder, if you are listening to this Monday night, our Halloween sale, 75% off because corporate went absolutely bonkers on candy corn for the holidays. 75% off any sub of your choosing, any sub you wish, the entire package perhaps, through Halloween evening. If you're listening to this Tuesday morning and sneak into my DMs at NotJDaigle on Twitter, we can probably help you out too. But listening live, 75% off right now through midnight, any sub you wish. Also, reminder that this show is brought to you by Sleeper, one of the fastest growing customizable fantasy football platforms in the industry. It's not fat, but it is there. And they do have very good players that we can have fat stacks if we pick them up. And that leads me to our Sleeper waiver wire pickup of the week, none other than Isaiah Likely, assuming Mark Andrews, who suffered a shoulder injury last Thursday, is ruled out. Remember, the Ravens have one single game in the next 21 days, Monday night against the Saints. They have no reason to throw everyone out there if they are at 50%, knowing they can go on bye in week 10 and return with Gus Edwards, even Rashad Bateman, if he's eligible to come back, and more importantly, Mark Andrews at full health. And so, touch and go here. But Isaiah Likely, we know since debuting in the preseason, if he's eligible to start for Mark Andrews, a 76% catch rate on 37 targets since the preseason, 8.7 yards per target, 11.5 yards per catch, and 2.1 yards per route run. Going back to his route since the preseason has actually averaged an elite 24.1% target per route run rate. So if Likely is starting, we also want to start Likely as genuinely a top 5 tight end for week 9. This, of course, comes down to Monday. We have to follow the tea leaves, follow the news, and see what happens with Mark Andrews on Monday night, assuming he just isn't ruled out by Saturday. But if Mark Andrews is out, Isaiah Likely, in my opinion, is a top 5 tight end. A deeper pickup, though, the sleeper of the week, if you will, because 6 teams are on bye, and we're all scrambling to fill slots in our lineups this week. And I think KJ Osborn can help you do that. Because what we've seen from KJ Osborn, assuming Adam Thielen's bruised knee keeps him sidelined, is that Osborn has averaged 5.5 targets in 9 career games. He's logged 80% of the snaps in. The Vikings still have a top 5 pass play rate from 11 personnel. And regardless of Adam Thielen's status, given that Irv Smith is battling a high ankle sprain and may not be available in this game or the next few weeks anyhow, that might lead to Osborn having ample opportunity regardless of Thielen being out there. 2 good matchups as well for Osborn coming up, pending Thielen and Irv Smith's status, given that it's the Commanders in week 9, 6 teams on bye. We need someone to play. Commanders, of course, allowing a top 7 rate of yards per snap to opposing boundary receivers, where Osborn would play in place of Thielen. And then in 2 weeks' time in week 10 against the Bills, tough matchup, yes, but inevitable negative game script abound. So I want KJ Osborn, most importantly for week 9, but maybe we get there in week 10 having to use him as a wide receiver 3-4 option as well. Reminder, head to sleeper.com or download the latest app to pick up both Isaiah Likely for Monday night and KJ Osborn for this week today. Let's get into Isaiah Pacheco's status because, again, 6 teams on bye. I know a lot of you are left scrambling. What we have is Isaiah Pacheco's start prior to Kansas City's bye week that did leave a lot to be desired. Pacheco outcarried Clyde Edwards-Helaire 8-6, but still failed to record a single target in the passing game. Jarrett McKinnon also saw 3 targets as the team's third down option, so not really a role you would want for a starter, especially in a 3-headed timeshare. But it has been 14 days, a full 2 weeks removed since Pacheco's first start. And we also know Andy Reid reportedly sat down with Eric Bieniemy, and they had a discussion on how they can, quote unquote, get more than 10 reps in a game for Pacheco and feel good about it. Pacheco's short-term outlook in this matchup in particular is volatile, given that we don't know what that increased role, if it even exists, entails. Also, remember, the Titans are allowing a league-low fantasy points per game to opposing running backs because teams can throw on will. Teams minus the Texans can throw at will against them. So you don't really need to run a ball against the Titans. But if Pacheco's going to have a larger role and we're in a pinch in week 9, not only do I not mind picking up and flexing him, hoping, fingers crossed, wish casting him into a larger role given the tea leaves, I also want to splurge a little more fab on him, thinking we may get a 12 to 15 touch running back starting with Patrick Mahomes for the fantasy playoffs. So whether or not I need him for week 9, even though he is viable for week 9, I'm wagering fab on him anyhow, thinking I might get a long-term value at his cheapest point of the year. Another option, if you need a starter at running back, I think James Cook is viable. Because what we've seen now is Zach Moss get healthy scratched around the bye in 2 consecutive games for the Bills. And that most recent healthy scratch this past week led to James Cook handling his most touches, 6, and highest share of backfield touches, 28%, since week 2. And you might say, just 6 touches. The Bills built a big lead against the Packers on Sunday night. They ran him out there in garbage time. But 3 of the 6 touches did come on the same drive in the second quarter. And given that they're playing the Jets and they are double-digit favorites, we can assume safely it's going to be double-digit score game script, positive game script for the Bills, thus leaving ample time and more opportunity for James Cook, especially in the second half. That's the logic we're using. So with 6 teams on bye, I think James Cook does pop as an RB3-4 if we are desperate to get out there immediately. Josh Palmer, remember, had a concussion going into the bye, but we're now 14 days removed, and he's reportedly at least participating in individual drills. And assuming he's clear from the concussion protocol and he's good to go, not only did we see Keenan Allen not participate in individual drills to open the week, oddly enough, with his hamstring injury, we know Mike Williams is going to be out the next 4 to 6 games with his high ankle sprain. And we also know Palmer last year in his only start alongside Keenan Allen in place of Mike Williams from the boundary did record a 17% target share and 5 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown. With Mike Williams definitely out, Gerald Everett banged up, and Keenan Allen's status pending for 6 bye weeks, Josh Palmer absolutely a wide receiver 3 for a Chargers offense still averaging 48 pass attempts per game. We at least know we'll get the volume, and that's something worth chasing, given that we're trying to plug holes in our lineups. Let's get to a few deep cuts because Tyler Conklin, the Conk Daddy, returned to our lives as a legitimate low-end tight end 1 the past 2 games, averaging 8 targets per contest with a 23.5% target share and a team-high 4 end zone targets. Maybe that's because Corey Davis has been banged up or out altogether. Davis, of course, was out this past game. But Conklin still, unlike weeks 5 and 6, when he was running fewer routes than C.J. Uzomah, has run a route on 75% of the team's dropbacks these past 2 games. So given that negative game script we talked about against the Bills upcoming, I think Conklin is at least a viable low end tight end one with volume. And with 6 teams on bye, that's good enough for me. Demarcus Robinson is also a deep option because we know Rashad Bateman is going to miss reportedly a few weeks. And Robinson stepped into that role from the boundary this past game and recorded a team-high 8 targets, a 21% target share in the interim. I understand the Saints shut out the Raiders, but I'm willing to chalk that week 8 performance up to the Raiders' failure on offense and not the Saints shutting down the Raiders, since the month prior, the Saints were allowing 33 points per game, and more importantly, a top 5 rate of yards per target to opposing boundary receivers, where Demarcus Robinson will play indoors on Monday night before Baltimore's bye. So Demarcus Robinson, wide receiver 3 or 4 for 12-team leagues that have 10-player benches, and again, have left us in a pinch. Another player I think we can use in a pinch is Kenyan Drake. Gus Edwards' hamstring injury has left him day to day, so we are not going to be sure of his status, most likely until Monday afternoon. But with 22 touches to Justice Hill 9 the past 2 weeks, we should expect Kenyan Drake to, at the very least, lead the Ravens' backfield in carries, targets, and overall touches, assuming Gus Edwards is out. So if that's the case again, Kenyan Drake comes back into our lives as an RB3 in a much better spot than expected, again, given New Orleans' most recency bias performance against the Raiders. Nyheim Hines was put on the trading block, but even more to the point, Jonathan Taylor re-aggravated his ankle sprain and is going to be touch and go throughout the week. We've already seen what Deon Jackson can do as an RB1 just a couple weeks ago with both Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines is out. So now is that there's this opportunity, if Taylor is inactive in week 9, Deon Jackson, who's only played 7 snaps the past 2 games, behind both these 2 players. But Deon Jackson is available now in a committee with Nyheim Hines. Not only that, if Nyheim Hines is traded before the November 3rd trade deadline and Jonathan Taylor's ruled out, we have RB1 Deon Jackson all to ourselves yet again. And arguably, this is the cheapest Deon Jackson will be, since Nyheim Hines, who may not get traded, has still yet to be traded. It is sort of worrisome that Sam Ehlinger targeted the team's running backs on just 13%, 12.9% of his targets, compared to Matt Ryan's 25% target share to Indy's running backs. But at the same time, we've seen in the past Deon Jackson is a player who earns targets. And if Jonathan Taylor's out, if Nyheim Hines is traded, Deon Jackson is a player we should absolutely nab off waiver wires to perhaps not only start in week 9, but get him for the fantasy playoffs long term. I know the results have not been sexy for Foster Moreau, but if you look at what's happened in Las Vegas' tight ends room the past 2 games, without Darren Waller still struggling to return from that hamstring injury, you have Foster Moreau running 62 routes the past 2 weeks on Derek Carr's 73 dropbacks. And the only other tight end to run a route in that span for the Raiders, Jesper Horsted, has totaled 2 routes. This is only Foster Moreau's tight ends room for as long as Darren Waller is sidelined. Darren Waller, of course, who has yet to practice since initially suffering that injury 2 weeks ago. And that's good enough for me to go back to Moreau, assuming in week 9, Darren Waller is again ruled out. And finally, Terrace Marshall, for whatever reason, has popped back up. And we've now seen, since Robbie Anderson was kicked off the field back into the locker room the past 3 games, Terrace Marshall's target share has increased in every week. 4.7%, 13.5%, and then last week a season high 25% target share against the Falcons from PJ Walker. 12 targets for Terrace Marshall in the last 2 games alone. Also has a 16-yard depth of target in the past 2 weeks to go along with this sudden 25% target share from week 8. So although it may be an aberration, that's something worth chasing given his ADOT and volume. With, again, the theme of the story, 6 teams on bye. Reminder, the waiver wire column is up at 4for4.com. And if you don't have access to it, that's your own fault, because you still can get 75% off through Halloween evening to read it. And it will be updated as well for all the ongoing injuries and news through Wednesday. We will be back with a preview show for Week 9, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, live on YouTube. Be there. But until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you then.